looking at the wage rate now, how it's determined, and the minimum wage as well together. So how the wage rate's determined has not been asked on a past paper before, but the minimum wage has. So it's the wage rate. There's, more that goes into it than just this, but in a very simple theoretical level, it's determined by the forces of demand and supply. So this is supply representing the supply of labour and demand representing the demand for labour, so businesses, so employers and employees here, the supply. And where they meet the equilibrium, rather than having price on the side, we have the wage rate, and I usually put it's quantity of labour, but here they've got level or labour employment level, so that's the number of people that would be employed. Now the thing is, I would love to be a doctor, but I don't think anybody would want me to be a doctor because I'm not actually trained. So the thing is that the supply of labour is for different markets and for different jobs will be different for each of those, because some jobs you need certain qualifications for and you need certain experiences for as well. So this is a very simplified model of the total labour market in a country or an area, but it doesn't mean that everyone would be, it's working out an average wage rate, to be honest. It doesn't mean that people actually earn that amount. Some people will, but some people earn a lot more and some people earn a lot less. So just a term here, remuneration, that's the monetary side of things. It's the money that you get paid for your work or service that you're providing. So if we have a shortage of labour, so supply is much further in here, around about this line here, we can see that puts upwards pressure on the wage rate. So if we've got a shortage, this increases the wage rate. And here I've just googled this and got to the BBC website. Skills shortages holding back the UK's economic recovery. So Crossrail, a major project in London to produce a rail track that goes across London, and here they're building tunnels for it. Crossrail have identified more women to become engineers and avert a skill shortage. It's not because they want to necessarily encourage equality or encourage women to get into those jobs. It's because when you have a shortage, businesses have to pay more for their workers. So they don't really like skill shortages, and it also makes it really hard for them to recruit. So remember the recruitment process from Unit 2. However, if you have a surplus of labour, so supply is more out here, we can see the wage rate would fall. There's downwards pressure on the wage rate. Here we have, I googled this as well, I just put in low wages, and we have an article here from earlier on in the year, apprentices get exploitative wages. Why do we think that is? Well, because various reasons, but because a lot of people are able, I suppose, to enrol in apprenticeship courses. So there's lots of people, because there's quite high unemployment at the moment, especially youth unemployment, lots of people want to get onto these schemes. So there's a lot of demand for people to get on this scheme, and that means there's a lot of supply of apprenticeships in the market. So that's really how the wage rate is determined, and how changes in the number of people that are working in the labour market can affect the wage rate. If you need to, for a question, just draw out your demand and your supply diagram. Remember, the demand in this case represents demand for labour, so these are the employers, and supply represents the employees. Okay, so minimum wage, this is what it is at the moment for people. So it is, apprentices don't earn so much. It is quite a low wage, we can see there. So this was a past paper question. Sorry this is so small, but it says, consider the view that there are advantages and disadvantages to both employers and employees from having a national minimum wage. I call this a matrix style question because not only has it got two sides, it's got two different stakeholders you're looking at, employers and employees. So I'm saying, it's like a 2x2 you need to plan out. So pros and cons, but employees. So from the point of view of the employers, so it might increase the costs, particularly if you've got, I mean, this is a lovely evaluative point, particularly if you're working in a labour-intensive industry and where your workforce is relatively unskilled, because they might be earning low wages and maybe a few of them on the minimum wage. So that's really going to affect you. And this diagram shows what happens when you introduce a minimum wage. So if this is the equilibrium here, W, and then you introduce a minimum wage which is above the equilibrium, what you get, this gap here between Q1 and Q2, between the amount of labour that's demanded by businesses and the amount of labour that's supplied, is called excess supply. It's the surplus of labour. So here we get a surplus of labour. And because of that, you know, the business's costs have gone up. So the business might reduce the amount of workers that they have to try and keep their wage bill the same. So that would actually increase unemployment. So some employers have some, you know, government officials say we shouldn't increase the minimum wage because that could actually increase unemployment and make lots of people worse off. I've just taken these from the MART scheme, so you might recruit more part-time staff who have fewer employment rights. Some extreme cases, and the government have started to name and shame the businesses that pay below the minimum wage, but some businesses might not take notice of the minimum wage, but I think that'd be rarer now because there's been a lot of naming and shaming this year. Remember, the minimum wage is not the same. It depends upon your age, so unfortunately you lot doing your A-level exams, if you're not 18, significant difference, isn't it, between that and that? I am over 21, only a little bit, no, quite significantly. So, yeah. Employees they may be tempted to use younger workers. So if you're an older worker, that might not suit you because you might be too expensive for the business. Other employees who are earning above the minimum wage might think, oh, well, you know, if the minimum wage is increased, I want a pay increase as well. So it might not just mean that the people that are paid minimum wage, that the cost for them increase. It might be for everybody. However, good employers may benefit from the minimum wage because they may think, you know, I want to pay a fair wage, but, you know, I can't stay in business if my competitors are paying under a fair wage. So they might welcome, you know, a minimum being introduced to the market. And it means that these like low pay jobs are kind of set by the low pay commission, and so that they don't have to negotiate with unions or negotiate with individuals, which can cause disputes and be lengthy and time consuming. So they might like it that it's just a set rate. And one of my students actually came up with a really interesting point that it's sort of, because the minimum wage is quite low and it's below the living wage, which we'll talk about later, it sort of legitimizes them being maybe a little bit unethical because, you know, they're following the law. They're not paying below the law. So it's sort of like saying, oh, it's okay to pay not very much to people, which it's not really, is it? And we'll get onto that later. But from the point of view of employees, so it's to really help low-paid workers. So it doesn't benefit everyone. It's really very much low-paid workers, so unskilled employment. Low-paid jobs very often done by more women, proportionally more women. So that could be a way of reducing gender inequality. However, if it increases unemployment, that makes more people worse off because their unemployment benefits will be less than their minimum wage. And because of this increase in costs, because of the minimum wage, some jobs have moved abroad. So structural unemployment called, not caused. So the minimum wage, there is the minimum wage, and that's the legal minimum that government, so any employer has to pay, and that's set by the government. But there's such a thing called the living wage. Now, the living wage is calculated by a pressure group, a research group, who look at the minimum standard of living that someone would need, and this is a real minimum. It's not like a luxurious lifestyle, and they calculate that the minimum wage, the living wage that you need to take part in a minimum acceptable standard of living is around about kind of £7. So we can see it's much more than the minimum wage, and so there's a bit of a campaign at the moment to get employers to pay the living wage rather than the minimum wage. So that's quite a current news story, so you might want to look at that. Lots of stuff on the BBC website about that.